Excerpts from the Journals of Mrs. Jean Hogan, June 2017 to August 2017. Friday, June 9th. Ethan's coughing has been getting worse lately. It wakes me up at night. Even from down the hall, I can hear the hacks, the wheezes, the phlegmy gasps of breath. Wish I had earplugs. Does that make me a horrible person? It's too easy to picture him lying there. Clammy skin, body racked with shivers. Poor Ethan, my little boy. Some nights when the coughing gets particularly bad, I get up and bring him a glass of water from the bathroom tap. His hands are always shaky when I hand him the cup. I stroke his hair and whisper what I hope are comforting words. They seem to help anyway. He always manages to force a smile. He's a sweet boy. Ethan doesn't say much when he's hurting, but I can read the signs. He's inherited his father's lousy poker face, so when I hear those hacking coughs, when I see the misery in his eyes, I bring him a couple of his pain pills. They seem to help, too. If we're lucky, they knock him right out for the rest of the night. He always seems to sleep better after taking them. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the effects to wear off, or for some ugly new symptom to rear its head. This is the third drug I've tried so far. Dr. Shaw was sure that this one would turn it all around, but I haven't got much confidence. I've been through this before. This isn't the kind of thing you get better from. It's times like this that I miss Jim. Miss him so bad that I just feel like curling into a ball and never leaving the house again. It's tempting. I'll think I'm doing okay, and then I catch glimpses of him. Little things. I see him in Ethan's freckles. I see him in the rumpled blankets and the empty pillow I wake up next to every morning. I see him in the unpaid credit card bills and the blank to-do lists on the fridge. And each little thing triggers a wave of such sadness, such emptiness, that it takes all my willpower to keep from weeping. I don't want to cry in front of Ethan. He deserves better than that. Can't write any more of this. Too many unpleasant memories. Maybe I'll try again tomorrow. Saturday, June 10th. Was surprised to find Ethan already dressed and watching TV when I came downstairs this morning. He hasn't gotten up before me since his preschool days. A good sign. I want to think so, but part of me knows it can't be that easy. He still looks and sounds pretty sick. Not as bad as last night, but it's there. I wonder if he's trying to subdue his coughing for my sake. It's shocking how much he's changed. 3 weeks ago, he was out tossing baseballs with the Mulvaney twins. Hair tousled, cheeks flushed with adrenaline. Now he can barely cross the kitchen without getting tired. His skin's turned a pasty white color, like dried glue. He's lost at least 10 pounds. I've tried feeding him everything I've got in the house, but nothing seems to help. I hate to say it, but being around Ethan's made me paranoid about my own health. Threw out the rest of my cigarettes the other week. I'm doing everything I can to avoid the temptation. I get Stacy, Ethan's babysitter, to pick up groceries for me now. I'm too afraid I'll walk past a drugstore and find myself waiting in line, asking for a box of Marlboros. Just can't take that chance. Not anymore. Some days the withdrawal symptoms get so bad that I wonder who's suffering more, me or Ethan. Which is a stupid question, of course. It just doesn't seem fair that neither of us gets a break. That I can't be at my best for him. He needs a perfect caretaker. He needs Mother of the Year, and lately that just isn't me. It's not all bad news, though. Got a call from Dr. Crawford's office today. His receptionist said that they'd like us to stop by next week to see if Ethan's a good fit for their program. I have to admit, my heart skipped a beat when I heard that. Still, don't want to get my hopes too high. Wouldn't be the first time something like this has fallen through. Thursday, June 15th. Took Ethan to see Dr. Crawford this morning. Getting him into the car was a challenge. He took one step outside and cringed, said the sun made his skin burn, like 1,000 tiny fire ants crawling all over him. It's the first time he's ever complained about something like this, and that worries me. It's getting worse. We both know it, but neither of us is saying it. Finally dug an old umbrella out of the closet to help shield him from the sun. He was wearing his Power Rangers sweatshirt, even though it had to be 70 degrees out. Asked him if it made him sweat, but he didn't answer. He just shrunk deeper into the folds of his sweatshirt and stared gloomily out the window. The drive was quiet. I tried playing his favorite radio station for a while, but it felt wrong, somehow. I don't think either of us was listening anyway. We just sat there and listened to the rumble of our tires on the pavement. The roads were strangely empty for a Thursday morning. I'd never seen the highway look so ghostly. Heat shimmers made the horizon wobbly and turned San Francisco into a mirage. We must have driven for a solid 20 minutes. The closer we drew to the shore, the stranger the buildings became. You expect beach houses out here. Flat, boxy buildings with swimming pools and jacuzzis. But not on this stretch, apparently. It was like some giant hand had plucked plantation homes from the American South and dropped them on the cliffs above the shoreline. An odd phrase popped into my mind as I stared at them. Strangers in paradise. Not sure where it came from exactly, but it felt right. I slowed the car when we pulled into the driveway to the Crawford house. I'll be honest, my first look at the place didn't inspire much confidence. Reminded me of those sprawling mansions you see in travel books about the English countryside, but not nearly as quaint. The architecture wasn't sinister exactly, but there was definitely something off about it. It demanded your attention. 4 brick chimneys. Who needs that many anyway? Triangular balconies jutting out every which way. Marble columns just a few degrees short of parallel. And row after row of windows. Panes of dark square glass. The shutters thrown open. The sun glinted in each one like a dot of captured flame. Look at me. Those windows seemed to insist. So I looked. It was hard not to. Ethan squirmed in the back seat. "Is that it?" he asked. "Is that the place?" He sounded skeptical. I didn't blame him either. The stories I'd heard about Crawford weren't incredibly reassuring. His success rate with unusual cases was surprisingly high, but people never felt comfortable being around him. Crawford House gave off a similar vibe. No welcome sign, no guest check-in, no indicator that anyone even lived in this place. At least it had a paved parking lot. Empty mostly. I parked in the closest space I could find and helped Ethan fetch his umbrella. Crawford House loomed up against the sun, so we were standing in its shadows. It was much colder than I expected. Ethan shivered inside his sweatshirt and clung to my side. "I don't like it here," he said in a high-pitched whine. It sounded strange coming from his mouth. I hadn't heard his voice crack like that in years. "Don't make me stay here. I don't want to anymore." "It's okay," I said, gripping his hand for comfort. "I'm with you. I'm not going to leave your side." We walked together up the front steps and pushed our way into the main hall. It was a wide, elegant space, laid out like the lobby in a fancy hotel. Electric chandeliers glinted over our heads. Potted ferns and dusty old portraits surrounded us on all sides. I saw the desk for reception and guided Ethan over, keeping my hand firmly in his. The carpet was so plush that my shoes disappeared into the red fibers. The receptionist looked up and gave us a vague smile. She had the thinnest pair of glasses I'd ever seen and wore a stiff gray cardigan. "Hello. Welcome to Crawford House," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes. My son's here for his preliminary checkup," I said. "I called earlier this week." "Oh, of course, Mrs. Hogan," she said. She peered at Ethan through her glasses. He shrank into his sweatshirt and gave my hand an anxious squeeze. "It's okay, dear. Dr. Crawford's been expecting you. Just go down the hall to the first room on your left. He'll come get you when he's ready." I thanked her and pulled the reluctant Ethan down the hall. This wing of the house had a musty sort of odor that reminded me of my mother's place. It wasn't pleasant. Ethan wrinkled his nose and shoved his sleeve over his face to block out the smell. Not a good start. Getting him to stay in this place was going to be difficult. But where else was I supposed to go? Crawford House was my last resort. If this didn't work, I was out of options. The first room on the left looked like a typical hospital waiting room, more or less. Couches and plastic chairs and coffee tables laden with pop culture magazines. A muted TV in the corner recited silent news. There was no one else here. It was so quiet we could hear the crashing of the waves from far below. The entire black wall was one vast pane of tinted glass. Strange for this sort of house. Ethan let go of my hand to wander closer. He touched the glass with one hesitant finger, then shivered. "It's cold," he mumbled. "But it's so sunny outside. How's it cold?" I didn't have an answer, so I said nothing. I joined him by the window and stared across the water. The sight was dizzying. Crawford House balanced on the very edge of a cliff, and the ground beyond the window extended maybe 10 feet before plunging away. It would be a long fall. I tried not to think about it. I could see the waves washing over the sand and the clusters of debris, mostly seaweed and driftwood. The beach was empty. Everything was empty. There was only the brief stretch of shoreline and the vastness of the ocean, and nothing else in the world. Nothing but us and Crawford House. In the dark tint of the glass, our reflections stared back at us. We looked like two ghosts floating in the blue. Later. Dr. Crawford came to collect Ethan while I was writing. He's a small man, built like a mole, if I'm honest. I was amazed he could see through glasses that thick. He said, "Hello, how are you?" The usual pleasantries. Seemed normal enough to me. His hair was thin, light brown peppered with gray. He also wore this absurdly long lab coat that went all the way down to his ankles. Ethan tried to hide behind my legs, but I managed to coax him out. He had retreated so far into his sweatshirt that I could barely see his face. I apologized for his behavior, said he was a bit nervous coming to such a new place and all. Crawford sympathized. He said that was common for most people, especially those around Ethan's age. The house took some getting used to, but he would feel right at home in a matter of days. Leaving the view of the ocean behind, we left the waiting room and followed Dr. Crawford toward the east wing of the house. Ethan's bedroom looked down on the tennis courts in the community garden. He said, "Isn't that nice?" I nudged Ethan with my elbow and he mumbled something in response. It might have been, "I guess." Passed a few other patients along the way. Not the most pleasant-looking bunch. Saw a woman who couldn't be much older than me limping down the hall with a walker. Couple of kids with tubes coming from every orifice. One man was slumped against the wall, muttering a stream of numbers under his breath. Crawford caught me staring and assured me that all the patients are perfectly safe. Wouldn't be allowed out of the rooms otherwise. It didn't cheer me up as much as he hoped it would. I was relieved to see Ethan's bedroom. I think Ethan was too. A plush queen-sized bed, carpeted floor, shelves full of colorful books, wide clear windows with billowing curtains. There was even a large flat-screen TV on the far wall. It was the farthest thing from a sterile hospital room you could imagine. Ethan wandered over to the bed and took a seat, bouncing lightly. He didn't smile, but he said, "This is nice." Crawford got to work running some diagnostic tests. Couldn't pretend to understand what he was doing exactly, but I let myself be hopeful. Ethan sat there quietly the entire time, only wincing when Crawford pricked his finger for a blood sample. Expected the doctor to slip the vial into his pocket, but he held it up to the light instead, squinting his eyes. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. He cupped the vial and came over to talk to me. "I have to run some tests on Ethan's blood," he said, "but I think he's a very good candidate. He can stay here overnight, and if things look promising, we'll start treatment in the morning." It took a lot of strength to keep my composure. I thanked him and went to go talk to Ethan. He'd already started flipping through the catalog of TV channels on the nightstand. He didn't look scared anymore, and he wasn't trying to hide, which, well, I took to be a good sign. I told him what Dr. Crawford had said and promised him he was going to get better soon. "Okay," he said, eyes still on the catalog. "It's a big promise. I hope I can keep it. Everything's in Crawford's hands now." Sunday, June 18th. It's my third night without Ethan in the house. My third night utterly alone. I felt alone, of course, especially after Jim died, but this is the first time I've had to live in an empty home. It's awful. I keep expecting to hear the noise of cartoons from the living room, keep waiting for the shower to run upstairs, but the reality is that no one brings sound to this house anymore but me. Sometimes I leave the faucet running in the kitchen just so that I could hear something except for silence. Then the steady dripping gets maddening, and I have to turn it off. Dr. Crawford told me that Ethan is settling in well and adapting to his new surroundings. He spends most of his time watching TV in his bedroom, which is what he does at home anyway, so I guess that's a good sign. They started the treatment and said they'll contact me when there's a change in his condition. And I'm welcome to visit whenever I want, as long as I call ahead. Otherwise, I can't really do anything except for wait. I've been working from home ever since Ethan started getting sick, but now being in the house is torture to me. I've started taking walks around the neighborhood just to get out of the damn place. Sometimes I see Megan Mulvaney out with her twins, and she always wants to stop and chat, but I always smile and pretend I'm off to somewhere urgent. I wonder how long it'll take before she gets the hint and stops trying. If I'm being honest, part of the reason I want to leave the house is that I still have a pack of cigarettes tucked deep inside the medicine cabinet. I don't want to be anywhere near the temptation. I can't bring myself to throw them out. I keep telling myself they're for emergencies only. Although, what the hell constitutes a cigarette emergency? So, it's just better to remove myself. But now it's night again, and the craving and the emptiness are hitting me hard. I'm writing this in my bed, one hand on the sheet beside me where Jim used to lie. I've got my ears trained to hear a sound, any sound, but there's nothing except the scratching of my pencil. Earlier I thought I heard the sound of a child laughing outside, or maybe it was just a bird cawing. I have a hard time telling what's real anymore. Wednesday, July 6th. Went to visit Ethan today. Poor boy was sicker than I'd ever seen him, all scrawny in his patient gown. I know that's just to be expected, that it's like chemo. It has to get worse before it gets better. Didn't make it any easier to see him, though. Ethan has never been a talkative child, but he barely said a word to me when I sat by his bed. Just stared blankly at Gravity Falls on the far wall, and nodded occasionally when I asked him a question. At one point, he turned to me and said, emphatically, "Mom, I'm fine." But his cheeks were clammy and pale, and I didn't believe him for a second. I don't think Ethan believed it either. Dr. Crawford said this is normal. His methods are experimental, he told me, and every patient reacts to the treatment differently. But in the end, they all get better. I hope he's right. I got a glimpse of the stuff in Ethan's IV tube, and it's a bright, vivid purple. It's not like any serum I've seen in any hospital before. Then again, no hospital's been able to help my boy, so maybe that's a good sign. I don't have much willpower in me to write these days, but I figured I'd get this much out. Hopefully next time I open this journal, I'll have good news to share. Wednesday, July 31st. Good news. What a joke. I can't believe how naive I was. I'm just shaking. Shaking with fear and anger and the kind of anxiety I haven't had since my teenage years. I'm curled up on the windowsill writing this, staring out into the furiously falling rain. It's been 3 weeks since I've seen Ethan last. In all this time, I haven't heard from Dr. Crawford once. He was supposed to call if there was any change in Ethan's condition, for better or for worse, so the radio silence had made me antsy and frustrated. I've tried calling his front desk, but the receptionist tells me every time, without fail, that the doctor is busy with a patient and can't come to the phone. Every time, I've slammed my phone back on the counter with shaky hands. At a certain point, I couldn't take the silence anymore. So tonight, I pulled out my laptop and started searching. For what, I wasn't sure, but I wanted to dig into the history of Dr. Crawford, see what his previous patients had to say. Was this long stretch of nothing normal, or should I be worried that I haven't heard anything in almost a month? Every source on the front page brought me to the same stale bio, the list of his credentials and the same few sources citing the power of his work. I'd seen all of this when looking him up in June. I needed something deeper, something that hadn't quite risen to the top. Eventually, I found a sketchy site called Rate My Doctor, an ad-ridden wasteland which looked like it had been shoddily put together by a high school programmer. I didn't expect to get anywhere, honestly, but the page for Dr. Crawford was miles long, full of testimonies from his previous patients, most of them looking like this. Sarah Munera wrote, "Dr. Crawford is a saint. Don't know how he does it, but I went in with stage 4 lung cancer and came out healthier than I'd ever been. He's a true miracle worker and proof that God is real." The syrupy sweet tone made me want to vomit, and the more I scrolled, the more I started to think this was a lost cause. Nothing here would tell me anything about Crawford that I didn't already know. When I reached a post somewhere in the middle, dated earlier this year, and the opening sentence stopped me cold. Dylan McGregor wrote, Dr. Crawford killed me. Literally. I was legally dead for 3 minutes. I thought it was fishy that I kept getting worse, even though everyone said he was supposed to be a miracle doctor or whatever. 2 months later, I was dead. Not even a near-death thing. I was totally under. Can't even describe what I saw while I was there. It was vague, blurry, but it made me so fucking scared that I started bawling as soon as I woke up. Stay away from him if you value your life. My heart was pounding. I kept scrolling, skimming through the messages, which had suddenly taken a grisly turn. Almost every single patient reported coming close to death or going entirely past the threshold. Near the bottom, one of the final posts drew my eye. I read it with a rapidly plummeting stomach. Marcy McKenna wrote, Earlier this year, I contracted a really unusual illness up north. It became obvious that the symptoms were slowly killing me, so when I left town, I went south to find Dr. Crawford. He was a little too enthusiastic about my case, took loads of blood samples, but never told me what they were for. Then, after I left, I heard stories from his other patients. I think I was the one who started it. He was using my blood to experiment. To do what? I don't know. But he's digging at something he shouldn't be. And I don't know what'll happen if he finds what he's looking for. The screen started swimming in front of my eyes. I slammed the laptop shut and stood up from my chair, unable to keep my hands from trembling. For a moment, I didn't know what I meant to do. Then a horrible craving overtook me, and I stumbled out of the room. I reached the bathroom and flung open the medicine cabinet. The Marlboros were tucked behind the stack of Jim's old pill bottles, right where I'd left them. It felt good to smoke, even though I hated myself for every puff. I sat by the window and stared at the rain. I'm still there now. The smoke hits the glass with each breath and dissipates in little curls of gray. Visiting hours are over at Crawford House. There's no way I can confront Crawford tonight. Tomorrow, though, I may not be Mother of the Year, but damn it, I am Mother. And God help any man who gets between a mother and her son. Tuesday, August 1st. Crawford House loomed above me when my car pulled into the lot. The windows glimmered orange in the light of the setting sun, like specks of vivid candlelight. The balconies were shadowy. The marble pillars stood defiantly at odd, slight angles. My stomach churned at the thought of what might lay inside. The receptionist seemed startled to see me. "Mrs. Hogan," she said. "We weren't expecting you. You know you're always supposed to call ahead." "I need to see Dr. Crawford," I said. "It's an emergency." She sputtered and tried to call something after me, but I was already storming down the hall towards Ethan's room. One of the other patients saw me coming and moved wisely out of the way. His IV drip slithered from his arm into the machine he was rolling along. The same purple liquid shimmered inside his sack. I wanted to grab it and rip it out of him. I reached Ethan's bedroom and shoved through the door. Crawford was there, standing over Ethan's bed. The slam of the door made him jump. He turned to face me, his eyes like little moons under his thick glasses. Behind him, on the bed, Ethan lay motionless, so thin and so pale. It looked like he'd lost half his body weight since coming here. The IV in his arm was flowing with a bright violet liquid. "Get them out of him," I seethed. "Get those damn IVs out of him." Grabbed Crawford by the arm and shook him, more violently than I intended. The glasses slipped on his nose. He looked alarmed, but only for a moment. Tore his arm out of mine with more force than I'd expected and brushed the wrinkles out of his sleeve. "You consented to these procedures when you admitted Ethan here," he said. "Everything was in that contract you signed. You pledged to keep Ethan under treatment as long as I, his doctor, deemed him too unwell for release, and in his current state, he's not ready to go anywhere." "I don't care about a goddamn contract," I screamed. "You're killing my son!" Crawford stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "Your son will not die," he said. "None of my patients die. Not permanently. Each one comes back stronger, healthier, and one step closer toward unraveling that great mystery of death, of what comes after." He leaned in closer. "Don't you want to know, Mrs. Hogan? What wouldn't you give to know where your loved ones go when they leave us?" Jim's face came to mind all at once, flooding in like water, hot and rushing. The number of nights I'd lost sleep on those old sheets, needing his empty pillow. The number of times I'd imagined him walking through the front door, taking off his coat, picking up exactly where we'd left off. Of course I'd wondered. Of course I wanted to know, but not like this. "What wouldn't I give?" I shouted. "I wouldn't give my only son, you monster!" Crawford lifted his head, but before he could speak, the heart monitor began to beep erratically. His thinning eyebrows shot way up. He rushed to Ethan's side and whipped out his clipboard, scribbling furious notes, wanting nothing more than to scream, attack him, tear him away from my son, but found that I couldn't move. Felt rooted to the spot. My breaths kept hitching and hot tears trickled from my eyes. It happened fast, faster than it should have. 1 second, Ethan's chest was rising and falling, his heart monitor beep, beep, beeping. The next second, it was silent. The beeps cut out and Ethan's body went still. He looked so small laying there, like a child-sized doll, all flat chest and stuffed limbs sprawled on the bed. Crawford got to work immediately. He yanked the purple IV serum out of the tangle of tubes, drew a second orange sack of serum from inside his lab coat, and swapped the two. In seconds, tiny drips of orange were trickling through the tube. I watched as the liquid slithered beneath Ethan's bandage and entered his skin. His arm twitched a little bit, like he'd been shocked. Now I couldn't breathe at all. Don't think Crawford could either. We stood and we stared and we waited. Then he woke up, gasped and coughed and sputtered, mucus flying from his lips. I let out an involuntary cry of relief, almost rushed forward to grab his hand, but something stopped me. It was his eyes. They were still shut, clamped so tight it crinkled the skin around his cheeks, and I could see his eyeballs moving restlessly beneath the lids. It looked like a video game playing in fast forward. "Ethan?" Crawford breathed. "Ethan, can you hear my voice? Can you come back to us?" He started to reach out a hand too, but hesitated. Ethan stopped moving. 1 second he was convulsing, the next his entire body went still. I felt those familiar dregs of panic seeping in, but no, he hadn't left us again. There was movement. I felt my skin crawl as his eyes turned in their sockets, as if he was staring at the doctor through the flesh of his eyelids. "Can you tell us what you saw?" Crawford went on, his breathing heavy. "Can you tell us where you went?" Ethan moved before either of us could react. His hand shot out and grabbed Crawford by the forearm. The doctor froze, presumably, I thought, in surprise at the sudden movement. But the seconds passed, and he stayed as still as a statue. He wasn't even breathing. I took a fearful step back and stared at my son. "Ethan?" I whispered. Then the doctor. I don't really have a word for what happened to him. The closest I could come up with is splintered. It was like he had suddenly turned two-dimensional, and something had taken a large hammer to his figure, smashing it into sharp little slivers. Ethan let go of his hand, and the slivers came apart, crashing to the floor with a sound of static and broken glass. I screamed an ugly scream all the way from the back of my throat, and Ethan opened his eyes. His sea-green irises were gone, pupils too. The space between his lids was, how can I describe it, a colorless, textureless void, absolute nothingness. It hurt my mind to stare into it. Ethan opened his mouth. Too wide, far too wide. His jaw was stretching like putty, and an echo of my scream issued from his throat. It stabbed into my brain. Blood began to dribble from my ears. I clapped my hands over them and stumbled back. Ethan's jaw continued to grow and grow and grow until it was touching the edge of his hospital gown. I didn't want to leave my boy, but I think I knew there was nothing left of him in that bed. So I turned and ran, weeping into the hallways of the Crawford house. There was something wrong with the walls. Cracks were forming in the wallpaper, the same jagged splinters, and harsh red light seeped between them. The patients were howling in pain, staticky pain, and I saw a few of them crouched over in agony. Their outlines were gray and blurry. Didn't stop to see if they would splinter too. I reached the main hall, but my way forward was blocked by a massive red slash that seemed to be bleeding in midair. The receptionist, or what was left of her, was slumped behind the front desk. The slash had split her face in two, one eye on each side of the diagonal slice, red light stabbing through the bloodless gash. I retched and backpedaled. The cracks had taken on the looks of spiderwebs. They were so dense, and I was afraid of being caught in the halls when that horrible light finally burst through. Spotted the waiting room doors and threw myself toward them in desperation. The TV inside was projecting nothing but gray lines, but the room itself looked untouched by whatever forces were tearing apart the rest of the house. I pushed a long couch against the door as kind of a makeshift barricade. Then I tucked behind the cover of the coffee table and curled up into a tight ball. My knuckles were practically popping through my skin, and I could hear myself sobbing, low and inconsolable. I bit my lip and struggled to keep the sound in. The large glass window was whole and intact, and the sun was setting off in the horizon, huge and red. I stared at it and tried to breathe. There was something mesmerizing about it, about the way it rippled across the ocean, smooth instead of sharp, calm instead of violent. It belonged to a world I was no longer a part of. Still, as I stared at it, I could feel myself cooling down, enough to stop sobbing at least. Minutes have passed since then, and the waiting room has stayed the same. I'm not naive enough to think this is over, though. Wails of pain are still echoing from outside, and I know it's only a matter of time before the horror reaches me too. For now, I have a little reprieve, so I'm writing this down, to set the record straight, to explain what really happened today. I don't know what Crawford has awakened. Whatever came back from that brink is not my little boy. But can't help but wonder, though, if he'd gotten close, if he'd reached into whatever world awaits after death and had plucked back something else. Something that had come back into our world using Ethan as a puppet. Is that where my son is now? Is that where Jim is? Some hideous world, some nightmarish place where the light bleeds red and everything is cracked and splintered. I don't think I can bear it. Oh God, please tell me it isn't true. The light has held off for a long time, but I could see the first cracks appearing around the doorframe. There's a shadow in the glass. Even from here, I could feel the void in its eyes, can see the droop of its elongated jaw. I can't write anymore. The doorknob is turning. Oh, Ethan. Sweet Ethan. I love you and I'm so sorry for what I've done. Whatever's on the other side, at least I'll be with you and Daddy soon. The preceding journal was discovered in the wreckage of the Crawford house the morning after its collapse. The cliff face on which it stood had eroded and crumbled away, sending the house and its inhabitants, 32 patients, 12 doctors, 4 administrative personnel, and 1 civilian, according to the sign-in logs, crashing into the ocean below. Most of the bodies recovered were heavily disfigured. One responder to the scene described the victims as hollowed out and deeply unsettling, but refused to go into further detail. The other houses along these cliffs have been evacuated until the source of the collapse can be determined. The bodies of Ethan and Jean Hogan have not been recovered.